Welcome back to Crit and Crit, everyone. I'm Scint.
I'm Axion, and we are still in the middle of the section on the Ghost of Christmas Present in Charles Dickens' A Christmas Story. Having just completed our discussion...
A Christmas Carol.
A Christmas Carol. Oh my word, I am an idiot.
You'll shoot your eye out, Tiny Tim.
We had just finished the section on the Cratchits and Tiny Tim, and are moving on to the remainder of the section on the Ghost of Christmas Present.
Where we might even see the Red Ryder BB gun.
Oh my word.
No, you're not living that down.
No, I'm not. So, the Ghost of Christmas Present then moves Scrooge on to a different celebration. This one with someone he's just as familiar with, if not a little more so, than his beleaguered clerk, his nephew Fred, the son of
Why don't we switch to Freddy anyway?
Because Freddy
never mind.
Because Freddy has no good moves yet.
Also, you just beat the crap out of Whitney and you don't need to switch to Fred.
Yep, and Fred is the highest level person in the party, except for Future now. Anyway, Fred is having a gathering with a few close companions, and I believe one of them is his brother-in-law? Or sister-in-law? Something like that? His wife's sibling.
Yep, his wife's... we have Fred, Freddy's wife's sisters, I think they mentioned two of them, and at least one of Freddy's friends who seems to have a thing for one of his sisters-in-law.
Yep. And they are having the time of their lives. They are having a celebratory Christmas. There is food, there is joking, there are games, and some of the games are particularly on the nose. I believe one of the games involves a sort of guessing game project.
Yeah, like the two games they specifically mention are Blind Man's Bluff and Yes and No. So basically 20 questions.
So
like, I'm thinking of a thing. Is it like this? Yes. Is it like this? No. Is it like this? Yeah. You know the game.
Yep. And the Blind Man's Bluff section pretty much focuses on how Freddy's friend is completely focused on getting some time alone with his wife's sister, and how Fred is kind of encouraging this.
Yep. For pretending not to know her and pretending that it was necessary to touch her headdress and further to assure himself of her identity by pressing a certain ring upon her finger and a certain chain about her neck was vile, monstrous. No doubt she told him her opinion of it when, another blind man being in office, they were so very confidential together behind the curtains. Yep, I'm sure there were many, many stern words exchanged. But yeah, like, it's actually something interesting to note that, like, given that we don't really know anything about Fred outside of he is Scrooge's nephew and the son of his late sister, and he's married, that, like, we don't know a whole lot. And it'd be easy to expect that, like, because the only relation that we know he has is Scrooge, that he'd be a much more dour individual than he is, but Freddy is just described as this perpetually happy Pollyanna of a man. If you should happen by any unlikely chance to know a man more blessed in a laugh than Scrooge's nephew, all I can say is, I should like to know him too. Introduce him to me and I'll cultivate his acquaintance. It is a fair, even-handed, noble adjustment of things that while there is infection and disease and sorrow, there is nothing in the world so irresistibly contagious as laughter and good humor. When Scrooge's nephew laughed in this way, holding his sides, rolling his head, and twisting his face into the most extravagant contortions, Scrooge's niece by marriage laughed as heartily as he.
Yep. The celebration is nothing but happiness. Everyone here, despite not necessarily being the best off, they're described as moderate. They're not as
They're comfortable.
Poor. Yep, they're comfortable. They're not as poor as the Cratchits, but they're nowhere near as rich as Scrooge.
Yep, and yet, who is having a good time that night? Everyone but Scrooge.
Yep.
Yeah, and, well, they're clearly talking about Scrooge right now. He said that Christmas was a humbug as I live, cried Scrooge's nephew. He believed it, too. More shame for him, Fred. He's a comical old fellow, that's the truth, and not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offenses carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him.
Yep.
This is, I think, the only person we have encountered in the present era that the story is set in that has had nothing negative to say about Scrooge. Freddy has had the door slammed in his face, he's been called an idiot directly to his face by his uncle. Whose uncle has constantly told him he wants nothing to do with him, leave me alone, I want to be alone, I don't want to be around you, you're an idiot and you embarrass me. And Fred doesn't care, he's only hurting himself by this, so it's like, I don't have anything against the old man. He could be more pleasant, he'd probably be happier if he was, but he's only causing harm to himself.
Yep.
Freddy is just a genuinely nice and friendly and pleasant person.
That said, he is not afraid to make some fun at Scrooge's expense, as we discover during the game of Yes and No.
Yep.
Fred, when it comes to be his turn, eventually is discovered to be describing a city-dwelling animal of some sort, and his wife eventually determines that the animal in question is Scrooge himself, after determining it to be an ill-tempered and unfriendly creature of urban note, but not a dog, cat, rat, horse, or otherwise.
Which it certainly was. Admiration was the universal sentiment, though some objected that the reply to "Is it a bear?" ought to have been yes. He has given us plenty of merriment, I am sure, said Fred, and it would be ungrateful to not drink his health. Here is a glass of mulled wine ready to our hand at the moment, and I say Uncle Scrooge. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man, whatever he is, said Scrooge's nephew. He wouldn't take it from me, but he may have it nevertheless. Uncle Scrooge. So, it's just kind of nice for Scrooge to see that. Like, no matter how mean and cruel he has, Togepi, been to his nephew isn't going to turn his back on him. His nephew still cares for him. His nephew still wants to try and have him around. Which, I kind of want to put a pin in that and come back to it when we discuss Christmas Future later, because it seems a little bit at odds with how things are presented to have Freddy portrayed in this way and then to see what we see with Christmas Future.
Yep. So, anything further to add on Freddy before we move on?
Let me look it over again and see, I do like this little thing that Dickens mentions of, after a while they played at forfeits, for it is good to be children sometimes, and never better than at Christmas, when its mighty founder was a child himself. It's because, well, how often do you see people complaining that people are behaving childishly, you're not being mature, you're spending your time on stupid little silly games like this? And it's Christmas, which Dickens really, really, really wants to emphasize that, you know, this is a time for joy and fellowship and togetherness and caring about your fellow man. Be happy. Be like a child for a little while. It doesn't hurt anything.
I believe that you are particularly I believe you are particularly fond of a certain C.S. Lewis quote that is relevant
yes.
here.
When I became a man, I put away childish things, including the fear of childishness and the need to be so very adult. Like, why does everybody care so much about I must be constantly seen as the adult in the room, I can never do anything that could be tangentially, potentially perceived as the slightest bit immature? What's the point of being around if you can't let yourself be happy, because joy seems to be inextricably linked with childhood? Is it just a case of, like, if you're not miserable, you're not really an adult? Because what does that actually say about life in modern society?
I mean, I'm sure Scrooge has some things to say on that regard.
Please don't kill me, Mr. Ghost, I'll do whatever you say.
I was going to go with bah humbug, but... let's see. Nope, that's confusion. Paralysis.
Yeah, so the spirit is rapidly aging, and we return to just a conversation with him, and let's talk about his children.
Yep. And this
Or
doesn't
not
make
his children.
Yep, this doesn't make it into every adaptation. It wasn't in the Muppet Christmas Carol. I don't think it was in the Mickey Mouse Christmas Carol.
I certainly had never seen this. Like, it really doesn't make it into most adaptations, probably because it doesn't directly relate to Scrooge's character development quite so much as look and see what you have done to Bob's family, look and see what you've done to your own life, look and see what you will become. These are almost tangential, and honestly, until we sat down to do these episodes and I actually read through it, I didn't know this part of the book existed. So it's really interesting. Right. Forgive me if I am not justified in what I ask, said Scrooge, looking intently at the spirit's robe. But I see something strange and not belonging to yourself protruding from your skirts. Is it a foot or claw? It might be a claw, for the flesh there is upon it, was the spirit's sorrowful reply. Look here. From the foldings of its robe it brought 2 children, wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable. They knelt down at its feet and clung upon the outside of its garment. Man, look here! Look down here! Exclaimed the ghost. They were a boy and girl. Yellow, meager, ragged, scowling, wolfish but prostrate too in their humility. Prostrate. Where graceful youth should have filled out their features and touched them with his freshest tint, a stale and shriveled hand like that of age had pinched and twisted them and pulled them into shreds. Where angels might have sat enthroned, devils lurked and glared out menacing. No change, no degradation, no perversion of humanity in any grade, through all the mysteries of wonderful creation has monsters half so horrible and dread. Scrooge started back appalled. Having them shown to him in this way, he tried to say they were fine children, but the words choked themselves rather than be parties to a lie of such enormous magnitude. Spirit, are they yours? Scrooge could say no more. They are man's, said the spirit, looking down upon them, and they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. This boy is ignorance, this girl is want. Beware them both in all of their degree, but most of all, beware this boy, for on his brow I which is doom, unless the writing be erased. Deny it, cried the spirit, stretching out its hand toward the city. Slander those who tell it ye. Admit it for your factious purposes, and make it worse, and bide the end. Have they no refuge or resource? Cried Scrooge. Are there no prisons? Said the spirit, turning on him for the last time with his own words. Are there no workhouses? The bell struck 12.
Which is a creepy way to bring that to an end.
Especially considering, as mentioned earlier, the spirit only has till midnight to live. So, hi. My final words are, look at the children of mankind have created, beware them, especially him, and throw your own words back at you so you feel absolutely horrible right before you go back to bed.
Yep.
Merry Christmas!
So, ignorance and want. And ignorance is described as especially to be feared. And, this is something that people over the years have had much to say about. There is a quote that I brought up in another unrelated discussion a couple of days ago, a rather famous quote from Isaac Asimov, the science fiction author, saying that there is a cult of ignorance in the world that has wound its way through our history and our populace that has fostered upon the idea that that democracy means my ignorance is as valuable as your understanding.
Yeah, just think about how the spirit outlines it, though. This boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom unless the writing be erased. Deny it, slander those who tell it ye. Admit it for your factious purpose and make it worse, and bide the end. So, factious as in faction. So, spread it to help separate people, to break people apart, to make people ununified. Being decried by the Ghost of Christmas Present, a day that is meant for all of humankind to come together in brotherhood and care about each other and try to make the world a better place. Of course, ignorance is going to be the problem there. Spreading misinformation, making sure people don't know about things is of course going to make things worse. And I think that we've seen that demonstrated perfectly well just in this chapter.
Yep.
Because look at Scrooge. When did Scrooge actually start caring about how his actions might be able to help people?
Really only just now.
Because he did what?
Mostly because he he saw things. He's starting to understand. He's getting exposed. He's losing some of his ignorance.
Exactly. Because Scrooge was in a position that he could keep himself isolated from the result of his actions, or actually the result of his inaction, he never had to care. It's not until people are basically hit around the head with a clue-by-4, in many cases, that they actually bother to start thinking about other people. Scrooge certainly didn't, until it was directly put in his face of, look at Tiny Tim. Look at this one person that you've decided to care about. Look at this, look at this, look at this. And in a way that he couldn't ignore, Scrooge would be really not much better off. He might have been a little bit more introspective, thanks to seeing how he'd messed up his own past, but now he's seeing the impact he has on others in the present, and he can't really ignore it anymore. Especially not having ignorance and want shoved in his face. So, if his ignorance can be stripped away, he can actually start addressing the situation of the want in his immediate vicinity. I don't think Scrooge can fix the world on his own, but he is just an example of what one person can do.
And he's certainly in a lot better position to help people than someone like, say, Bob Cratchit.
And Bob still goes out of his way to help people when he can.
Yep.
Bob is just a generally kind and easygoing person. He doesn't want to cause problems, he wants to be kind to people, and he wants to provide for his family. So it's just interesting that Dickens actually called this out in such a way, and, well, I find it interesting that very few adaptations preserve the characters of ignorance and want. I wonder if there's a specific reason behind that, if they're just difficult to fit in, which I'm not sure I buy quite as much because, let's be real, this entire story is a fever dream. Scrooge could easily be hallucinating the entire incident with all of his spirits, especially considering, the story ends with him being back in time on Christmas Day as though no time had passed at all. This very, very easily could have just been something he hallucinated, like he told Marley in the first place, and therefore any adaptation could lean into that and have very, very little trouble actually working in the entire situation with ignorance and want, just as here's an additional fever dream on top of your first fever dream. It wouldn't be hard to maintain the integrity of a suspension of disbelief here.
Yep. But
I think thematically, people really just want to focus on other aspects. If it's easier in some cases to focus on just, look, see, we made you remember how happy you were and remind you need to be kind to others. We don't need to have ignorance and want show up and make everybody feel bad.
Yep.
Because audiences tend to not like being called out on things, even if that's the intention of the author, which I can't imagine why Dickens would have included them if he didn't want the audience to have a reaction.
Yep.
And, Dickens is not, unique to this story with this. In his other works, he has basically cried out about how, awful workhouse conditions were, drawing on his own experiences, but many of his characters reflect this experience of that, with, David Copperfield is my go-to on that one, which I didn't really enjoy the book, but he did spend a lot of detail on how miserable Copperfield was while having to work in these conditions.
Yep. Yeah, and he's not shy about bringing these kinds of social and economic issues into his work, and that's the kind of thing that a lot of people would complain about in the modern day.
Which is interesting, because, in many cases, it's not always explicitly meant as commentary. I think it's just, it informs the character's background. It helps describe how the character came into the position they currently are, and helps inform why they make the decisions they do. It's just really more, if you want to dig a little bit deeper, you can find things like that pretty easily. You're going to be able to tell just at a glance of, yes, Ebenezer Scrooge and Bob Cratchit are going to have entirely different experiences of Victorian London, because one of them is rich and the other is poor. They will be able to run in different social circles, they will be able to afford different things, and, illnesses are going to affect them differently because of the available quote-unquote medicine. I have to use quote-unquote because it's the Victorian era and medicine is special. But yeah, it's not hard to read in like economic and social implications into almost anything, just because it's honestly something that really impacts a character's perspective more than I think people tend to realize. Because like even today, like talking about America without talking about economics is really hard because everybody's going to have their own experience with it. Like, hey, go out to dinner. You're going to have the person who says they're going to go to McDonald's and order off the dollar menu is clearly coming from a different economic position than somebody whose thought is, nah, let's go to Wendy's and get like something biggie sized. We're not going to order off the 4 for $4. We're going to go splurge because we can afford that because we don't have to worry about money quite so much. It's little things like that that can really add up to shaping a character. Why do they act this way? Because they've had to be economical. We know Scrooge used to be poor because Belle told us that, and Scrooge is so paranoid about becoming poor again and having to deal with the effects of poverty that he has become callous to everyone around him, even though he gets no actual benefit from doing so. And quite frankly, he'd probably be better off treating Bob better for the sake of his overall business. Happy employees, happy business, more customers, and you don't have to worry about not being able to trust your employees.
Yep, but to step my toes a little bit into modern issues, that's a problem that even nowadays most or a lot of businesses have, where they either don't realize that, even though it's been proven over and over and over that happy, not overworked employees work better and result in better resources and better profits, but or they don't care because they'd rather make the short-term gain on mistreating their employees than the long-term benefits of treating them properly.
I suppose, but yeah, I'm trying to focus mostly on Scrooge here, and
yeah,
I did not mean to go down the rabbit hole of like an economic read of everything, because that's just going to be a factor of what comes up, because like it's just, I think it's kind of hard to overlook just because it shows up so overtly, especially when you have the Ghost of Christmas Present outright saying, ignorance and want are problems created by man, these are their children, they need to do something about it. And ignorance is the more dangerous one because ignorance stops you from doing something about want. And people will spread it for their own purposes and divide people further and just make the want situation even worse. And, well, what I find interesting is that Scrooge does not actually have time to go back to bed after this. Because Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it not. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting his eyes, beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground, towards him.
Yep, and that would be the Ghost of Christmas Future, which we will discuss next time. Do you have any final thoughts on Christmas Present?
Ham couch. I'm still fixated on the fact that, like, it's not just a room full of meat, it's furniture made of meat, because this is our aesthetic now. I don't remember that being in the adaptations I've seen. I mostly remember it being, like, mountains of food and a feast prepared around a table, and I don't remember him actually lounging on a throne of glazed hams and sausages.
To be fair, I don't imagine that's particularly easy to depict. Especially in the live-acted ones, where you're having
But what do you mean it's hard to get that? It's Hollywood. They have nothing but hams.
That was bad even for you.
I thought it was pretty good.
Anyway, we will continue next time with a discussion of the Ghost of Christmas Future. See you all then.
Bye!